there's still another matter concerning the CBN, as the Central Bank of Nigeria has also issued a directive to bank directors with non-performing insider-related loans to step down immediately, while ordering banks to commence remediation of the loan defaults of the affected individuals. By the way, insider loans can be described as loans given to individuals who are seen to be insiders, like executives, shareholders of the bank, who have close ties, close relations with the banks. Doc, insider loans.
Well, we know this happens from time to time. And most of these loans are taken and they are not collateralized. Because either your husband is the MD or CEO of the bank or the chairman of the bank, and you need some slush fund, you just ask this bank money is transferred to you without due diligence. And most of the time, even without intention
to pay back.
Because after sometimes this facility or loan gets into what in accounting terms bad debt. Yes. Because, of course, this is
smart guys.
Yes, because after one accounting, second, third accounting year, and nothing is happening to this loan, the bank regards it as bad debt, that, look, this is not recoverable. And they don't continue to add it to their book. So this happens a lot, and I think CBN directive to directors is in order, but I just feel that CBN should just go ahead and act.
Should we be having bad debts in the financial sector, particularly the banking sector, where these monies are not for the banks? In quote, they are monies brought to the bank by depositors. So why, because a bad debt is money that you can't collect, and then the creditor is unwilling to take action to recover it. So why should there be that sort of complacency?
Yeah, you see, in accounting principles, what it means is that I've given you or I've sold something to you. Now I've made an attempt, and there's, an agreement that's supposed to tell me how I'm going to recover this money. So usually I put it in my book to say, yes, this person is owing me because it's part of, I'm able to recover it, it becomes my money. Now it gets to a certain point, the accountant says, look, this money seems not recoverable. So you don't need to continue to add it to your asset. So you remove it from your asset register. And that's what they call the principle of the bad debt. That this debt, it seems that it cannot be recovered. It's not that the bank may not go after you, but they are no longer calculating it as part of the asset.
I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So yes, these are depositors' money. The bank is trading. They are also making profits and gains. That of course, every time you walk into the bank, you get your money, as it were. Some other people are depositing, of course, they are settling other people. So, but the principle of bad debt is an accounting principle. So, it's the fact that there are some loans that you feel that at a certain point that recovering it may become very difficult. And sometimes, some of all these loans, what the bank does is that they recruit loan recoverers, agents who go out after these people, especially those that are collateralized. But the problem with the insider loan is the fact that there are no securities that actually guarantee those loans, because the person who is taking it is taking it on behalf. I remember there was the news that happened in one of the banks when the accident happened, and they said, oh, this guy took about 50 billion for the wife to do construction in certain place. Now, we don't know what security is on that property. Now, the lady is no more. How do you recover such a loan? So it becomes really very difficult. These are the kind of situations you find. And that's why I think that only the CBN itself should do its due diligence to see that if banks are transacting and they are giving out loan, because recently there's a circular that says, okay, this is the quantum of money that you can keep, and this is the quantum of money you can give out as loan. And of course, the banks that were not following, CBN were fining them. Now, if CBN can know those, whether these monies are given out, they should be able to also know who received those money and do due diligence on them. And where such loans do not follow proper procedure for lending, and I think such directors should be sanctioned, in my view. So CBN can actually go ahead to sanction people without making news out of it.
Now, my question is this. I understand what bad debt means, and I guess that the audience, some people do understand. But the question is, why should loans be given without the necessary process followed? If a certain amount of money is given as loan, even if you walk into the bank today and you ask for loan, there are certain requirements. There is collateral and all of that required. Now, if these are waived and loan is given, that means, like you said, people take that money without the intention of paying. So it suggests that from the onset, the intent to pay was not there. And the person who approved the loan also knew. That's why it wasn't tied, or some of them were not tied to collaterals, because they wanted to exploit the concept of bad debt. So they had it in mind that after a while, if they pay fine, you don't pay, we can easily waive this aside. These sharp practices going on, which the CBN is trying to nip in the bud. What do you think the CBN should do further? Because if you ask them to resign now, the directors where there's so much insider loans, if you ask them to resign, does it stop it?
Okay, so first of all, I won't, outrightly say some of these people went to get the loan with the intention of not paying back. What I think these bank executives, bank directors, bank chief executive officers, other stakeholders, and investors in the process, what I think they do is this. Because of the position they occupy in the organization, that in itself made it very difficult for the loans that they take to be collateralized, because they are shareholders. So if you're asking for collateral, they're already shareholders. So probably the shares that they have or the money that they have in the bank could be, used in place as collateral, even though it may not suffice. However, one of the reasons they go after this money is because they want to use it for business purposes. Taking out that money to run businesses of their own without profit, without paying profit to the banks because of the position they occupy in the bank. So it's like getting free money to run a business and pay back whenever you like. And sometimes businesses go bad, transactions go bad, they make losses in the process, and they were unable to recoup the loan, they were unable to get profit for which they use the money for, then they become stuck. And in that specific case, they find it difficult to pay back. While in other cases, of course, the human tendency will come, which is the instances you've mentioned, where and Doc also, that they may not have intentions for paying back. But now the CBN is coming. It mentioned that the processes of getting back this money must be initiated. It must be remediated and possibly collateralized. Means they are going to go after the properties, some of the physical properties, or probably the equity of these persons in question. And if not, they will be, you let them out of the board of directors, out of the board, the position which they occupy. That's a huge thing to lose. So I think these persons are going to go in and out wherever they are going to get that money. They will get the money to have to settle that.
Yeah, but we don't know how much is involved in this money, so you cannot be talking about loss or gain. Yeah, the challenge here is the fact that doesn't ask, why will people take loan without following due process? And there are so many 1001 reasons, not just in Nigeria, anywhere in the world, where you have an insider, somebody who can bend the rule for you within the system. You find that the rules are bent, but it does not apply to everybody. You have set a standard, but you see, people see, oh, yes, I know that this person is not qualified, and I'm sure that he's going to be able to do some certain things with it. And then sometimes they take undue risk. Remember one church some years ago, where after they had done their harvest, and all the money that was made in a year, they gave it to their treasurer. And he took a risk and gave it to somebody to go do importation. And now
there was capital flight at the end of the day.
And said there was an accident, and then of course the entire money was lost. And this chap does not have any reserve where he's going to go get money. It was a big fight in the church because see, people say, oh, that we have contributed, because he didn't envisage that those were going to happen. For him, it's let's quickly just do this business. Anything can come and then we will share. So it looked promising. And that happened from time to time. And somebody come to you and say, I have this idea, and I know that it will sell, and give you all the reason in the whole world why it must sell. And now you are looking at it. Yes, this person needed to pass through some processes, but you also are now being convinced maybe he's a good talker or seller, and he has sold you into this idea. And say, okay, well, let me put my fund into it. But at the end of the day, but because you are using yourself as guarantee, you know, even within the police, when they arrest some people, they say, because of his
self-recognition.
Yes, they call it the principle of self-recognition, that this person, yes, we know he's a very responsible man. He's known in community, and therefore, because of that, we can allow him to go. But there are some people that you have to go look for somebody who has so much money to be able to guarantee.
Yes, they must present surety.
Your base. So those rule bending happens in systems. And here you're finding that people are having access to fund, but because it's deposital fund, CBN must be interested to ensure that at the end of the day, if banks are winding down, then of course nobody loses money. And really, if you just go and check, you will discover that all the banks that are folded,
insider loans.
Insider loan. Look at Savannah Bank, for example, and the rest of it, all insider loan. So it is detrimental to the health of financial institutions. So CBN must pay attention to it. But I'm saying that they can do it better by looking at the books and see where loans are connected to some certain families, and then they ensure that those things are taken, and where these people have collateral. And I think they should insist that those processes be regularized, so that the bank itself, which is supposed to be an entity outside of the directors, can recover its funds.
I want to look at this from two angles. Now, one of them is what Prey said, position. By virtue of the position these debtors occupy, it was easy for them to obtain credit from the bank. And we also know that we live in a society where there's a sort of worship for those in higher authorities, those who are in higher position than you. So the concept of or the practice of my oga comes in. So your oga asks for loan. You don't even have the voice to query certain things, because you are thinking, this person is an executive. This person is a critical stakeholder, shareholder. And you know that the stake that person has in that bank is quite high. Sometimes the boldness to engage certain people, you don't even have the boldness to make them go through the process. That is there too. So because there is sort of an intimidation because of the person's position, people naturally want to even bend the rule. Sometimes so to seem like, I am loyal. Another time to seem like, this person is my oga, so that you can even maybe put a word forward for me later for promotion and all that. There are certain reasons why the rules are bent. It could be that the person who is even bending, oga, you don't need to bring this now. We know you now. It's you now. From you, will I be demanding that? So it's a two-way traffic. It could even be the person who's seeking the loan, who's asserting his position. It could be the person who's approving the loan rather, who's conceding and not even want to ensure due diligence because of the position of who is demanding that loan. And even when certain period of time has passed, where they are to start making recovery, there's also the reluctance because of the position of the debtor. These are also issues. And this the CBN is doing is to ensure that corporate governance is strengthened. I don't think that the CBN should stop at recovering the loan. There should be a review of guidelines regarding insider loans because of how often it happens and the abuse that has come with the system, so that it is reduced. We don't keep getting cases of this. Well, if it doesn't become news and it's within the banking sector, sometimes there is no thorough scrutiny. But when it becomes a matter that is in public domain, all eyes are on the banks that are concerned, eyes are on the CBN, and the CBN feels like they are being watched. So they too do not want to disappoint. They ensure that whatever they are set out to do, that disciplinary action is taken. So I welcome that is news, but I also want the CBN to take critical steps in forestalling this. We cannot really totally, because even in the Securities and Exchange Commission, or when it comes to sales of securities stock, there's insider trading. All of these things we cannot totally rule out, because in every organization, sometimes there are those who would compromise. There are those who would not adhere to the guidelines. Sometimes they get away with it, but sometimes they are also caught. But I think there are more can be done.
You see,
there's a place I want to point out.
Is why I said it's not news. We live in an environment where news come every other day.
So another news will topple that.
We topple it, and everybody seems to forget.
I don't think we should let that be, because these are two issues now concerning the CBN.
Whether you like it or not, it makes a headline, and that is what it is. People have looked at some of all these issues. So I think regulations goes far beyond just making
the news.
Okay.
Or really just giving people notice. Is actually also moving out. That yes, of course, it's not intended for the news. It's published by CBN, but I think this should actually be given to the banks to say, okay, well, we observe that there are insider dealings here, and we want these things settled within a period of time.
I think that's where you're heading.
And if in 1 year these things are not regularized, we will sack the board. So there will be no complicity of the board and the directors who are involved in this kind of dealing. You see, because there are some certain things that we hear today that the other bank now, they are still in court over some of these things that we're talking about.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, where your chairman has taken so much money, and of course, because the chairman, he has so much share, and he said, I want this thing, and he said, I cannot give it to you. Say, I'm taking my money away and putting it in another bank. And you are threatened. Because if you look at it, only very few people can leave money in the bank, in the environment where we find ourselves. So when you have somebody who can put money and leave it in the bank for you to do trading, at least you should find a way to make life easy for the guy, because if you move his money out, you become the loser at the end of the day. So these are the things that can happen. But I think that regulation beyond the noise is the fact that we actually be seen to be doing and taking very serious, drastic measures to ensure that such things are not done.
Okay.
And where they are found, people are dealt with based on the law.
Okay, so what I wanted to point out is that these loans, of course, when they are taken by the directors, the CEOs and all of that, sometimes, becomes a source of financial disruption in the whole system. And like you rightly mentioned, bad loans. So in order for them to stem this tide, the CBN is coming up with this. It could be that the CBN has seen from hindsight, from their regulatory powers and from the regulatory hindsight, that look, there's a disruption coming for the banks. You know, the kind of disruption that the banks experienced during Lamido Sanusi Lamido's tenure as the CBN governor, where the banks were actually built. Probably the CBN has seen that something like that is going to happen. So it's giving the banks 180 days to make sure it regularizes these loans because of the potential it has to disrupt the whole system. And not just that, giving out these loans, the CBN also have a role to play. In fact, they have a role to play in the sense that it looks like these loans are even being approved by the CBN. Because if you look at the report very well, it said insider-related facilities approved by the CBN without specific timelines. Without specific timelines, banks are required to regularize within 180 days all insider-related facilities above the limits prescribed by Section 19, subsection 5 of the Banks of BOFIA, which is the Banks and Other Financial Institution Act 2020, which were approved by the CBN without specific timelines, said the CBN. So the CBN equally is saddled with the responsibility. In fact, it has the power to approve those loans from the CEOs and from the stakeholders of the banks. So if it is the CBN that approved it, that means it approved because it has, of course, the act that established the CBN gave it that power. And it also gave it the power to use other instruments and mechanisms and ways to recoup this loan back to itself. The thing is, without timeline. So even the persons who came to borrow these loans, we can't really fault them to say they've not paid back these loans for quite a long period of time when there was no specific timelines for which those loans were specified to be paid back, even of the bank regulator itself, and it approved these loans. So it's a good thing that it's a wake-up call, and the CBN, because it laid out these guidelines for the regularization of this procedure in 2024. That means the CBN already had it in its agenda that in 2025 they are going to be putting out this circular, and they are coming after these bank executives and directors who have not been doing well in paying back these loans. Probably they are taking advantage of that loophole in the law that did not prescribe a specific timeline for these loans to be paid back.
You know, one thing I think, that's why I say there's a need for review from time to time, because some of the problems or the challenges that we find in the financial sector or in any sector for that matter is that there are the guidelines sometimes are too open-ended. So it gives room for people to circumvent them, people to go around it. There's so much discretionary powers sometimes allocated to authorities, allocated and to people who dispense certain duties, and some guidelines are not clear-cut, like the one you just mentioned now. So if it takes eternity for the debtor to repay, they are allowed.
The law says?
And I think that when you were talking about the CBN, by virtue of its position, having hindsight to know what could happen if you don't recover these loans,
yes,
they always knew. It's just that sometimes we wait for things to go very bad before we begin to take actions. Insider loan has been a recurring issue in the banking sector. It's not today. It happens every now and then, and after now, it probably will still happen. That's why we're asking, what happens to those who have contributed to this present case? If they resign, is that all that happens?
No.
So what happens if you recover these loans? What happens to insider loans? Are you going to review the guidelines under which insider loans can be given? Because insider loans everywhere have to be regulated strictly because of the tendency of abuse. It has to be regulated strictly. And if we look at the banks, the banking system, how many banks have collapsed and how many banks collapsed last year? After the consolidation, it wasn't quite common for you to see a bank collapse. Before it happens, you see merger and acquisition happening. But it seems like the banking sector has relaxed a bit. Now, when the CBN asked for recapitalization, that was aimed at strengthening the bank further. After recapitalizing, and you are strengthening the bank, so you cannot allow anything that will water down the gains of that, and there's a collapse at the end of the day. So I guess that's why the CBN now is doing further audits to ensure that, areas where we may have challenge, let's quickly tighten those areas. But apart from taking up a sort of an action to remedial action, let us also take proactive action to ensure that the cases of insider loans are nipped. They are reduced to the barest because of the tendency
These are loans coming from rich. These are rich people.
Yes, they are rich people who could also bring down the banks. There are rich people who could also bring down the banks. So there are ways to handle this thing. While you want to keep your customer base, you also want to keep the banks going. Because you cannot say because they are rich people and they have critical stakes and then you allow them run the bank aground. All the depositors will suffer. The entire system will suffer for it. So there's a way around this.
Yeah, but I think the regulators, the onus is on them to be sure that people play by the rule. Now, even if it is within the rule, violations and abuses are possible. I just told you a story of not a bank but a church where people take undue risk. That is also find that these are properly assessed. That, for example, these loans are not acquired to buy fleeting assets, maybe to invest in cars, buy a helicopter, no. They should be something that is plowed into a business that's viable. And the risk assessor within the bank should be able to do their due diligence to be sure that, yes, the possibility of the loan getting bad is low. That is what it is.
But there's also, the CBN also put up a regulatory framework in place. There's a threshold that insider loans must not cross. And it's about 10% it must not cross 10% of the paid up capital of the establishment of the bank, which is about 10% of what the stock that was, the IPO that was given to the public and how much people pay to obtain some of those shares, which constitute a part of the capital base of the bank itself. So there is already a regulatory framework in place to make sure that these loans cannot cross 10% or 5% of your paid up capital. So if it cannot cross that threshold because they felt, all right, at the worst, we assume that it gets to about 10% or 5% of your paid up capital. And that in itself is risky enough, but it's not that risky to take down the banking,
It's massive.
Well, you do know, that guidelines are one thing. Adherence to the guidelines
and also,
if you take 10% of it
of the paid up capital,
yes, 2 trillion capitalized bank.
That will be for each bank. That will be for each commercial bank. That's what
I'm saying. Yes, because you have banks. Tier 1 banks are already having their capitalization up to 1 trillion.
Yes.
Now, if you have a bank who has 2 trillion, for example, as its paid up capital, and you're talking about 10%, that's 200 billion.
Yes.
Now, I think, yes, that's massive. Now, because you imagine that one person is taking 200 billion.
No, not just one. That's the entirety of the whole insider loans.
Even at that, it is still a lot of money.
I think it's reasonable.
I don't think it's reasonable enough. The reason I say this is
when you say
guidelines
it's not saying insiders. You can imagine that 10 directors are taking 10%. And that's already 100.
No, they won't cross.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the rules of engagement should be adhered. And what CBN should be doing should be enforcing some of all these rules. Because sanctions come with regulations. That when we see infractions, CBN should not be afraid to wield the big hammer. And that's the only way to create deterrence for others. Because if you demonstrate with 2 or 3 banks,
others
the
will
others
learn.
will sit up.
Yes, I agree totally with what Doc has said. If you say there are guidelines stating that insider loans should not exceed a certain threshold, I want to tell you here that they have broken those guidelines. Not today. They have been doing it. And that's why we've seen the collapse of certain banks. If they adhered to that guideline, we would not have had cases where banks collapse. But because there have been abuse of the guidelines, that's why there was major problem and certain banks had to go under. So it's for the CBN to wake up. It's doing a lot, but it needs to do much more. Where there are infractions, you do not wait until that infraction leads to something major or leads to a major risk in the financial sector before you begin to act. Once there's an infraction, there should be measures set in place where red flags are raised when guidelines are breached. So this needs to happen. This needs to happen. And
yeah, but because we really know, me and you know that banks don't give loan to people they don't know.
Okay.
In Nigeria. And that's real where it is very difficult that even for small business owners to access loan from the bank is like my friend would say, they will ask you to go and bring the head of your great-grandmother that was there 10 years ago. So the rules are set. But what you find is that once it has to do with people within, the rules are bent most of the time. And that's why you see, if you look at really bad loans to the banks, it's all within the people in the system and who understand the system, who are familiar with the system. Some of them may not even be directors in the banks, but they have placements in the boards.
Yes.
And they can actually get anything they want from the system.
You know, this takes my mind to the ICPC ethics and compliance reports.
All right.
Yes, you know that part of the report talked about corporate culture and administration. These were fundamental issues in the NDEs. These are also fundamental issues even in the private sector. So I think largely corporate governance is a challenge. It is a challenge, and a lot needs to be done to strengthen corporate governance, whether in the private sector or in the public sector. Because where you have challenge with the corporate governance of any organization, the life of that organization is threatened, where people compromise on the rules and they are not dealt with. Disciplinary action are not taken immediately. It becomes a systemic thing that begins to eat up the life of that organization. So basically, it all comes back to corporate governance, which we should pay attention to. This issue of familiarity, abusing closeness, and having dealings based on relationships that undermine set rules, undermine set guidelines, we need to deal with it.